God we trust to the CIA, standing on the edge of a revolution.
Welcome to the Intelligence Hour, cutting-edge expose on the actions of government in light of the U.S. Constitution. I'm your host, former CIA officer Kevin Shipp, reporting to you from a secure studio somewhere deep in the southern United States. As always, I introduce the program with these important questions. Do we live currently under a post-constitutional government? Is there really a shadow government, a massive system controlled by secrecy or deep state, as some call it, that controls Washington, D.C. behind the scenes? Why does it seem like congressional hearings, as dramatic as and articulate, eloquent as they seem to be, why is it that those hearings never go anywhere? Why do government officials and the heads of major Wall Street corporations commit crimes, very serious ones, and lie under oath, but they're never charged, while Americans of lesser status are hit with maximum penalties? These are the issues that we deal with on this program, head on. We have no conservative or liberal bias, no Republican or Democratic influence. In my opinion, those are just created to divide us. And we have no manipulation by large corporate sponsors, so we don't have to worry about making anybody that pays us mad. We're just here to analyze the truth. So, here at the Intelligence Hour, we have one goal: to fulfill our constitutional responsibility to inform you, the American people, our audience, about the actions of your government. You are the voice of government by the people. You're the solution to restoring freedom, peace, and justice in this country. Because I believe in your courage and resolve to make a difference, I humbly take the risk every week to expose the unconstitutional actions of government. I do it because I adore this country and for the love of freedom. So sit back and relax on this Monday evening and join me for a fascinating discussion. Tonight we'll be talking about the tragic crash of Swissair Flight 111. Was it an accident or was it a criminal act? Join us after the break and we'll talk to an expert about the results of his personal investigation. Tonight, we have as our guest Sergeant Tom Juby, former criminal investigator for the Canadian Royal Mounted Police. And as I understand it, that's the equivalent of our FBI here in the States. Sergeant Juby is author of Twice as Far, the true story of Swissair Flight 111, who personally was involved in the airplane crash investigation itself. On the 2nd of September, 1998, at 10:31 p.m., a major air disaster occurred. 7 kilometers off the coast of Nova Scotia, Canada, near the small fishing village of Peggy's Cove, a Swissair passenger jet with 229 people on board crashed into the ocean with the complete loss of life of everyone on board. To this day, the real cause of the crash of Swissair Flight 111 is in question. My next guest, Sergeant Tom Juby, was one of the primary crash investigators examining Flight 111. Based on evidence examined by Sergeant Juby, it is very possible that this crash was intentionally caused. An investigation into the real reason of the tragedy was concealed. I have read Sergeant Juby's book, Twice as Far, in detail, and I highly recommend it to every member of our audience, and you'll see why after we're finished with this interview today. It is fascinating. I can tell you this: it's an expert job of laying out the case that the horrific crash of Swissair 111 may not have been an accident. Sergeant Juby, welcome to the program.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
Well, it's great having you on finally, and I've read your book in detail, and of course you and I have discussed this with Brent Bileski, our producer, in the past, and it's a fascinating book. Sergeant Juby, you're the expert on this. Let's begin just with your account of what happened. What happened with Swissair 111?
Well, what happened was the plane took off from JFK Airport and flew for about an hour. About 15 minutes before the end of its flight off Nova Scotia, there was a fire on board. It was destined for Geneva. It was run by Swissair. It was an MD-11 aircraft, 229 people on board, and it was considered to be the UN Express or the UN shuttle flight. There were a number of UN officials on board, and it was a regular flight to and from New York, Geneva, and they had experienced no previous problems with any of the equipment on the plane whatsoever.
So apparently it was pretty regular travel route for dignitaries and others related to the UN and I guess some Saudi royals and people like that flew on Swissair that particular flight.
Yes, there was a Saudi prince on board, and it was a very high-end flight. The first class at that time in '98, first class ticket was about $12,000.
Goodness.
So it wasn't your average flight.
So obviously it was a relatively high profile flight, definitely, yeah. And so there was no mechanical problems, no indication that anything was wrong based on what you all saw during your investigation?
During the investigation, the Transportation Safety Board, which is the equivalent of your NTSB down there in the States, the Transportation Safety Board examined the logs for the aircraft for the whole fleet. Swissair had 20 of these aircraft that they flew. They're long-range aircraft that fly around the world, and very, very dependable, built by McDonnell Douglas and then taken over by Boeing. Boeing bought out McDonnell Douglas, and Swissair maintained them. They had a company, one of their own companies, doing maintenance, and the logs for everything was thoroughly examined. The log for this airplane was thoroughly examined, and for all of the rest, and there was no indication of anything that could be pointed to as similar to your brakes on your car. If you've got a certain make or model, there's a major recall for them. That didn't happen with anything on this plane or any of the planes.
Well, I remember I flew quite a bit on Swissair, and my understanding was they have an outstanding safety record for their aircraft.
They do. They've lost aircraft in the past, as have every airlines flying. In the past, they had lost one that they thought might have been an arson. They lost a couple in the Middle East due to terrorism, but that's over a long span of time, and the average flight had no problems whatsoever.
Right. We considered it pretty safe. Yeah. Yes. Okay. Yeah. Go on, please.
It was one of the safest airlines going. So, anyways, the plane experienced a major fire and crashed about, as you said, seven miles off the coast of Nova Scotia, and it took a major undertaking to retrieve the wreckage and the remains of the passengers and crew, and that was accomplished. All of the passengers were identified to name and address so that the next of kin would have a death certificate. The debris was retrieved, most of it, and a reconstruction was undertaken of the forward area of the aircraft. The fire had occurred in the overhead area above and ahead of the first class area and into the cockpit area. So that area, that portion of the aircraft was reconstructed from all of the pieces, and as well all of the other aircraft for Swissair, the MD-11 aircraft, were viewed and thoroughly examined to have a comparison, to have a complete knowledge of how the materials were in the aircraft. the one fault that was found with the aircraft was the entertainment system, in that it had been wired in a peculiar manner so that it didn't conform to what the TSB, Transportation Safety Board, wanted.
Mm-hmm.
So they ruled it as faulty.
Now Sergeant Juby, was that the entertainment system? I guess it was retired General Alexander Haig was putting entertainment, I guess, gambling systems or entertainment systems on some planes. Was that what this system was?
That's what I understand. It was his system.
Uh-huh.
And again, the TSB had examined all of the paperwork for that system, and they had found no previous faults with the system. No shortages, no shortage in the wires, no overheating. Everything seemed to work okay. The problem was the routing of the wires. They didn't like the way it was. It wasn't consistent plane to plane, and it didn't exactly follow the requirements that had been set down.
I got you. Thanks.
And they deemed it as faulty. The problem then became the press got hold of that idea and ruled it as the cause of the fire. Mm-hmm. And it seemed that within a week or two, it had been solved in the press that it was a short-circuited wire due to the in-flight entertainment system.
Pretty typical. And I wish we could get into detail. Your book is fantastic. But since we just have a half an hour, based on your investigation and what I read in your just phenomenal investigative report that you placed in your book, when you all did the testing of some of the elements that were on some of the wires up in that area, there were elements that did not occur on the plane, and I guess aluminum, magnesium, and iron being the three that it appeared that you found, and that's kind of where all the craziness started, I guess, isn't it?
That's correct. We did advanced testing. Some of the most advanced testing in the world was utilized. The guy doing it was considered one of the best in the world to do the testing, and he found high amounts of magnesium, aluminum, and iron in the actual short-circuited beads. And I describe in the book that process and how they get to be in the beads. But the problem was we had no source. We did a thorough examination of the aircraft and the materials in the aircraft, and we found no legitimate source on board the aircraft for that material. Right. Now, the problem is that material, the magnesium, iron, and aluminum, in a powder form, is an incendiary device.
Well, they use that in rocket boosters.
They add it to rocket fuel. Yeah, your railroad line, your railroad companies use it to weld tracks out in the middle of nowhere. It's the quick process to actually weld steel, and it creates a pile of heat, and it will melt steel.
And you're sure not going to find that in an entertainment system.
Well, that's not in an entertainment system. Right. And what we found when we put the aircraft pieces together was we had an abundance of molten aluminum. And the aluminum alloy of the aircraft. And the thing is, and right there's the combination aluminum alloy of the aircraft. But the problem with the aircraft is, or the problem with the combination is, the aluminum in the aircraft had an alloy of other elements to make up the material, and we never found any of those elements in the beads. So what happened was that the doctor doing the testing determined that the aluminum could not have come from the aircraft. The magnesium didn't come from the aircraft.
Mm-hmm.
There's no iron in the area. And when we examined seawater and did seawater tests, it didn't come from the seawater.
Mm-hmm.
So we're left with his report that said, and he actually used the word sabotage.
Mm-hmm.
He described an incendiary device and that he felt that was the cause of the fire.
Mm-hmm.
What happened when his report came out
mm-hmm.
was that it was refused by the Transportation Safety Board.
Mm-hmm.
The TSB in Canada only examines crashes for the safety aspect. They do not examine any portion of a criminal aspect.
Now, if I understand it correctly, and I was a federal agent way back when there were dinosaurs on the earth, but that could be, if it ever went to court, that could be obstruction of justice to obstruct that kind of serious information in the crash of an aircraft. So by them sidelining it to a safety investigation, that would be a very cagey way of screening away from a criminal investigation, I would think, which would be obstruction.
Well, not only that, but that was just the start. What they then did was they went back to the doctor and told him to change his report.
Goodness.
And he submitted a second report, and they didn't like that one because it still included magnesium, iron, and aluminum,
Goodness.
And that he had no source for it. So they went back to him a second time, and they said, basically, look, bud, you want to get paid? If you want to get your pay for the cost of this, you will change your report and remove any indication of those elements, any criminal aspect of the fire.
Mm-hmm.
And he was under a civil contract, and it was hundreds of thousands of dollars, and basically he was obliged to do as he was told.
That's phenomenal, Sergeant Juby. I want our audience to understand that the contract that they bound him to, the small print in that contract essentially said, you will find the results that we want or you will not get paid. Well, he didn't find the results that they wanted, so they threatened to not pay him. And his findings amounted to the elements in high explosives. I just want the audience to kind of put those two together and kind of see what you're finding out here. Anyway, go ahead.
So, anyways, the reports actually were turned over to the RCMP, but by this time, I had been cut out of the investigation. We conducted the investigation as an assistance to the TSB, and partway into it, this doctor found these results, and I started a criminal investigation. My bosses came to me and told me to stop. You will cease and do no more criminal investigation. You are only here to assist the TSB in photography and exhibit taking and this, that, and the other thing. But you will not conduct a criminal investigation.
Incredible.
And I got into trouble for continuing that investigation to the point that they reviewed my notes and demanded that I remove material from my notes.
Now, Sergeant, that's another important point, because the notes taken by a criminal investigator are so important that those are even used in court on the stand as evidence, and those notes are not to be changed. To change those notes in itself is also obstruction of justice. Isn't that correct?
I've seen guys severely reprimanded by a judge merely for striking out a word in his notebook.
Right.
And
anyway,
any alteration of your notes, a police officer's notes, is an obstruction of justice.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that's jail time. You don't go past go, and you don't collect the $500, is what we say.
Yeah, you get a felony of 10 years in prison. But yeah, that's right. That's right.
Yeah. So here, my bosses came to me and made this demand, to the point that they actually gave me a written piece of paper, a typed piece of paper, and they signed it. It's proof positive of an obstruction of justice.
Now, I'm not going to ask you to answer this question, but if I was you, I'd have a copy of that baby.
You want to believe I do.
Okay, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Anyways, by this time, when they did this, I was informed that I would continue doing the photography and whatnot for the TSB, but I would have no further knowledge of any reports that were coming in from the TSB, which included this testing in Ottawa. And as it turns out, the initial report that said sabotage had already been turned over to my supervisors, unknowns to me, and they were telling me that I was never going to know about that report. I was the one and only RCMP member actually working the file, physically working the file. So to keep me from knowing what's in the reports is another obstruction of justice. Obstruction of a peace officer. And again, that's jail time.
Let's see. So just to add them up, Sergeant Juby, we've got at least 3 solid obstructions of justice already going on, and I understand it gets worse than that. But yeah, incredible.
Yes, and who's
incredible.
counting?
Good. Yeah, that's right.
Exactly. And I had meeting after meeting where I was told to cease my activities, and a lot of it is recounted in the book, and it was an out-and-out obstruction. The problem was I knew that if I actually told my bosses what I thought of them, I was going to get kicked out of the hangar. One of the other members had been in the hangar and done a bunch of research on various terrorist groups, and in 1999, 2 years before 9/11, he came up with Osama bin Laden as a potential and Al-Qaeda. And at the same time, he attended a meeting in New York, talked with the BATF members and the FBI and several other agencies, and arranged for the BATF fire investigators. These guys are considered to be the top fire investigators in the world.
Right.
They were going to come up to have a look-see and offer an opinion and advice. And he was told to cancel the trip, that they were not allowed in the hangar, and he, within 2 days, was told to change his notes and that he was going to have no more contact with me, with the file, or with anybody associated with the investigation. He was kicked out of the hangar.
Goodness great. And these guys got away with this?
Yeah, they have so far.
So far,
that's one of the
until
reasons
now.
why I've written the book.
Go ahead.
It's one of the reasons why I've written the book. The evidence is there. There's sufficient evidence in the book to put these guys in jail. This goes all the way to the commissioner of the RCMP at the time, and his following commissioners, because I've made complaints to the force on a constant basis ever since I retired in 2002. And they know what I have for material, and they refuse to do anything at all. we had conducted burn tests with the FAA, and one of your guys down there, he's considered the top fire investigator, one of two top fire investigators in the world, and he's running the FAA fire department that they have, the fire test department down there. They burn test. They burn pieces of the aircraft to see what they give off for gases, how they burn, and whatnot. And he is the top expert. His opinion was that there had to have been an incendiary device on that plane. And at the time, he knew nothing of the findings of this doctor in Ottawa. He was just going by the burn damage and what he knew of the materials. There was insufficient material in the aircraft to cause the damage that was done. Now, I've made that known to my supervisors, my bosses, the senior members in the RCMP, all the way to the commissioner, and they refuse to do anything. I've now made it available to the Minister of Public Safety in the government up here, and they refuse to do anything whatsoever. So
phenomenal.
It's absolutely amazing when you have a police officer who's been accepted in court across this country on perhaps more than 100 times as an expert in various fields, including fires, and your own supervisors actually turn a blind eye to what you have to say.
Now, and I read your book is so detailed and documented. You, literally, just in my view, as a former federal agent, you could take your book and you could sit it on the witness stand, and that thing would be rock solid. There's so much evidence in there, so much of it is documented, and it's written in such an analytical, impartial way. It is just, you could say it's complete stupidity, but that happens. But this has got to be more than this. These people are actively standing in the way of the evidence that you're presenting. And the question is, it's apparent, at least to me, that this goes all the way to the top.
These guys are experienced police officers. We're not talking rookies. We're talking guys with major experience, supervisory positions, where they're not getting paid the average amount of money. They're in a totally different snack bracket, and they're getting paid to follow the law. And at the same time, they're getting paid to follow what their legal or what their political supervisors tell them.
I'll tell you, Sergeant Juby, one of the things I got out of your book, two of your supervisors that you mentioned in there, and you're very graceful and objective, but I'll just have to call them politically correct lizards. As I read through the things that they did, it just completely slimy and shady, and covering for their career at all costs. And you wonder how much of this was a legitimate cover-up and how much of it was just covering their own collective rear ends,
Well, combination of both. If you go against your senior bosses, your chances of promotion are nil, and I show that in the book, What Happened to Me. And it's not only the promotion within the outfit, it follows you when you leave, because you're a very close-knit group. And other agencies. I applied for a police college in Ontario, and I know that they contacted my supervisors to find out about me, which would have been normal. But my supervisors sewered me. I had been told on at least two occasions that I would see no advancement whatsoever in my field, that I was done for.
What
because
you're
I would
detailing
not.
here, Sergeant Juby, and I know because I've given a lecture on this, I'm giving another one at the end of this month on the procedure that is used every single time to silence whistleblowers or silence somebody that is coming out with evidence they don't want the public especially to know. And they'll start with the denying promotions, giving the person lesser assignments, and of course there'll be veiled threats through all that. If and when the person leaves, they'll blackball them and make phone calls in the entire industry so they don't get hired. I mean, this is all a standard specific process that I know I see over and over and over with all the whistleblowers that I talk to, that this is used all the time. And 9 times out of 10, it is used to conceal the truth or some illegal or negligent activity that they're trying to hide.
Well, yeah. So I've read, and in my case, I have the documentation, and I show it in the book, and I mention it in the book, but I show it on my webpage that's associated to the book. I have the documents there on the website, and
Excellent.
the public can
Sergeant,
read them.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, sir, but while we got that, could you give our listeners that web address to your website right now before we forget? Could you give that to everybody out there so they can go in and actually look at these things?
Yeah, the book is called Twice as Far, and the website, you can either put in twiceasfar.ca or Swissair111.ca, and it's the .ca, which is Canadian. That's the Canadian website.
Gotcha.
Twiceasfar.ca.
Got it. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, that's twiceasfar.ca. You can go out and see the actual evidence that Sergeant Juby has out there. I've read the book. It's in the book. It's irrefutable. I'm sorry, Sergeant. Didn't mean to interrupt you there. Please go ahead.
Yeah. Well, it's been a long process. I've complained to the force, as I said, and they had set up well, her position was called an ethics advisor. She was an assistant commissioner, which means it's the third rank from the top. She did a 2-year investigation of my complaint. It took them 2 years less 2 weeks to send me 4 pages, and in the book I call it nothing but garbage. 4 pages that basically said that the inspector who told me to change my notes, my boss who told me to change my notes, was following the rules laid out in the Royal Canadian Mounted Police Act. That it was in the Act that he could have me change my notes. I've searched the Act inside out. There's no such statement in or act portion in the Act.
There couldn't be. It would be illegal, but yeah, that's laughable. Yeah.
What's in the Act is that I will obey the commissioner of the RCMP, and if he gives me a command, I am supposed to obey it. The argument that I put forward was, if it's an illegal command, am I obliged to follow it? And it comes down to our criminal code up here that says that you will not do certain illegal acts, and that is one of them. You will not obstruct justice.
Absolutely. Well, it's so typical. That's like asking somebody, a superior, which has happened. That's like somebody asking someone in the NSA not to report the fact that they were spying domestically on U.S. citizens, or they're going to be administratively punished. I mean, there are laws above even appointed officials, but certainly supervisors who are trying to get their subordinates to alter information. But yeah, that's very true.
Yeah, I just watched the Snowden movie. That's quite the movie.
Well,
anyways,
I'm sorry to interrupt you. And regarding Snowden, Snowden made it clear that if it wasn't because of cases like Thomas Drake, who did go through the system with the NSA, was subsequently raided and charged with espionage for trying to do the right thing. Snowden listed Thomas Drake's case as one of the reasons he didn't try to go through the system. So you call this blowback. You could blame the system for some of these things because it is causing these people to understand they'll be destroyed if they try to do it the right way. And it sounds like both the case in Canada and in the United States, it's the nature of the beast of government, I guess.
I think our guys have been taking lessons from some of yours.
I think so. I think they went to the same training programs, you know. Sergeant, I'd like to have you back. We got started a little late because some technical things today, but I want to go through just so the listeners kind of get a summary here of this, the phenomenal work and really the courageous stand that you made and you're making now, because you're speaking truth to power, no doubt about it. But laid out in detail are 4 clear cases, at least, of obstruction of justice, explosive residue, aluminum, magnesium, and iron, which are found in rocket booster fuel also, was confirmed. 2 separate experts. One said that residue is in there, didn't occur on the plane normally. 2 experts, one said that it was sabotage and another said it was an incendiary device. Both of those were sequestered. So you've got all these things lined up, and then you come forward and document this, starting internally, and of course, then they try to silence you and stop your promotions, and on and on and on it goes. So what I want the audience to hear is this is such a typical, clear case of either criminal activity, criminal negligence. I think it's beyond negligence. I think the presence of this residue goes beyond that, and then what appears to be a cover-up, perhaps at the highest levels. Sergeant Juby, you are an absolute hero. I know Brent Bileski is a good friend of ours. Both he set this interview up, and I appreciate that from Brent so much. We're running out of time, but I'd like to have you on, Sergeant Juby, if I could again in the future.
That would be great.
And ladies and gentlemen, remember the book is Twice as Far, The Crash of Swissair111. And please go to Sergeant Juby's website, twiceasfar.ca, and look at this documentation that he has on there. It is compelling. I know when I walked away from the book as a former old investigator myself, he presents a pretty solid case in evidence with this entire thing. Sergeant Juby, you're an absolute true hero. I appreciate you having it on, and I hope we can have you back in the future.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Okay, Sergeant. Thanks for coming on. We'll talk to you again soon. And again, ladies and gentlemen, remember Sergeant Juby's book, Twice as Far, can be found on Amazon.com. And I would encourage you again to go to his website, twiceasfar.ca. That's for Canada.ca. And remember, as always, you can catch me on my Facebook page, From the Company of Shadows, where I regularly expose violations of the Constitution when they pop up, and sadly they do. You can catch me on my Twitter feed at Kevin_Shipp, SHIPP, or check out my book, From the Company of Shadows, on Amazon.com. And as always, if you have any questions or comments, good, bad, or ugly, just email them to me at intelligencehour@gmail.com. That's intelligencehour@gmail.com.